I have to say in advance that everything that the Honourable Steve Thomas has mentioned here, I agree with from a clinical point of view. Although I'm going to disagree with you, I'll explain that in a short while, but the scientific points you've made are quite correct. I tell you in advance I will be supporting this bill. But I suspect it's also fair to say that no one individual could possibly know all the details of all the statutory bodies that we have existing in the state. So I'm actually not overly embarrassed to say that I knew nothing about this excellent facility that is being managed here or will soon cease to exist. And just hearing about the excellent work they have done does make you think, well, this is actually a facility that is actually worth a great deal of money, because it is certainly a business which is viable throughout the world, providing over 40 years reliable, high-quality animal research models here in Western Australia. Fine. So in that sense, I would be sorry to see it go. But I'm not. See, animal research is an emotive subject. I had a look back over the history of animal research, and you mentioned, the leader of the opposition mentioned the gory details he would spare us, and I'm very glad he did so, because they are gory indeed. I mean, even now, dealing with animals is really quite an emotive subject. My brother-in-law, for example, qualified as a surgeon in Beijing. And when he emigrated to the USA, he wasn't able to function as a doctor because of the differences in law and education there. Excellent surgeon and cardiac surgeon. So he actually went to work in a facility in Washington where he was operating on animals, mice, I believe, rats, I believe, to perform cardiac surgery and measure the effects of the drug-eluting stents which would help to save people having a heart attack, rather than doing the coronary artery bypass grafting, the stents there, and make it. They're very complex, they're very small, very technical, and to understand how well do they function in animals with the blood flowing, will they have clots, will people who take these stents be subject to an early death because of stuff we didn't discover in the animal experimentation. That's highly specialised work with highly specialised animals as well. But each one of those animals died as a result of that test. And you could say, well, yes, it's understandable for the greater good of mankind. I understand that. I just don't like it. So my personal view is that of horror. And looking at what happened in the not-too-distant past, you wonder, should we really be doing this? At a philosophical level, I discussed it with my son, one of my sons just a few months ago. We have a sorry history in Australia of doing the same thing on humans, experimentation on indigenous people in the 1920s and 30s to help us understand how the human body reacts to pain, for example, thought to be okay in those not too distant times. Were those ethical experiments? Well, of course they were not. But could you then say, once those experiments had taken place, once that genie had been released from that bottle, are we allowed to use the results of those experiments to carry on with medical research elsewhere and develop the products? Can we use the product of such experimentation to take further advances in medicine? I think the question there becomes much less clear. It is not that easy to decide, is this actually ethically based or not? I think we would move forward, certainly, but the nasty questions remain. And so the same could be said, I would think, for animals. So we could perhaps all agree that the experiments shouldn't have taken place in the first place, but society's moved on, and we no longer seek to justify that sort of treatment. So yes, we'll use the research findings there and move on. Also, I have to confess that I'm a hypocrite. I've discussed it with my boys, because I happily eat meat, but I will not, I could not kill a cow to provide the beef for myself. Now, this is stupid. I know it's stupid, but it's just the way I am. And I suspect many people are like this. If I can name the cow, if I could stroke the cow, if I could say, listen, how are you doing today, happy cow, Ermintrude the cow, I am not going to put a bullet in that brain or take its throat out, because I won't. It's like my pet dog. I'm not going to harm my pet dog, and I'm much the same with most animals. I'll make a few exceptions, but the animals that we like to eat, I wouldn't do that. So from that philosophical standpoint, I'm actually opposed to animal studies in general. Now, it could well be that with our recent scientific advances, having based our science on decades, hundreds of years of experimentation on animals, are we now in the position of using artificial intelligence to create the modelling which would at a molecular level allow us to do experimentation on a computer and a simulation in an artificial intelligence environment? Could we then dispense with animal experiments in the first place? And the answer is, to some degree, yes, but not for everything indeed. So I think we're reaching a stage now where our reliance on animals would be a lot less. And by the way, talking about lines here, I mean breeding animals with dementia, breeding animals with specific cancers, this is all very well and good. We have got the expertise to do that. It just doesn't sit well with me. So as a medic, this is, again, the hypocrisy of me. As a medic, I will use the medications that you need based on the animal studies, but it doesn't sit well with me. So there are benefits from that, undoubtedly there are, but I'm just not comfortable with it. So in that sense, I welcome this bill because it pleases me. It soothes my conscience a little to know that less of this will happen in WA. But there's another problem here, and that is that we are exporting 80% of these animals to other parts of Australia for very good purposes, but other parts of Australia are not helping with the funding of the organisation here. And I find that is actually a little bit unfair. I think that's not right. If we had suitable funding, and bearing in mind the reason this is being done is because it's losing a lot of money. And that's another very good example. If we're going to spend or lose a large amount of money for a service which other people want but aren't prepared to pay for, then the question comes, well, if you're not going to do that, why should we take the financial hit? And there I would very much welcome an answer to that. Could it be that with this impending closure, that other organisations, looking at the potential, looking at the loss they will be suffering, could they then take this over? I think they might. Would they do that without this bill going forward? Possibly not. Because if we're going to pay for it, they're going to sit back and say, well, keep on paying for it. So, in a sense, the practical and the philosophical align here for me, in that it's a financial consideration here, and it also aligns with my desire not to hurt animals. But also, this valid point made by the member for Wanneroo, observing that 80%, that really is a situation which is made in the other place. It cannot be allowed to continue. I believe that the government approached the Commonwealth ahead of legislation and to see if more equitable funding could have been found. And it was rebuffed. And I think the right answer in that case is that if that is the case, then we will simply close the business. Now, I do have concerns. The remaining 20% are of animals which are used here. Are we going to be suffering? Are we going to be losing essential components in the research in Western Australia? That's a very valid question, and I would very much like the opinion of the Minister in the Committee of the Whole to see if that question could be happily resolved. I expect to be able to support this bill despite the answers which I'm expecting to come to receive from that. Now, negotiations are currently underway, I believe. They're confidential. They'll be very much commercial confidential, and I don't expect to hear any information about that in this House yet. That would be the plan B. It could be that the government is confident it's progressed things to such a point that the provider in the future will be saying, yes, OK, we'll take this on. I'm not expecting to hear about that. That is not something that would be the remit of this debate for this bill. So at this moment, I will simply take a moment to commend the ARC, the ARC, on the work it's undertaken for the past 40 years. Commend the staff of 65 individuals. I wonder what's going to happen to their jobs, by the way, in the future. And I wish them every success under new ownership and new governance, which I anticipate will be coming. I think the value you've made, the proposition you have made there, is actually valid, and we'll see what happens. So in the hope of some clarification about this, the identification of a service provider in the course of the Minister's reply and the time frame, so if all falls into place, I anticipate that we will be supporting this bill.